I'm not really sure how to start this video. I don't know how it's going to be received, and to be completely honest with you, I am a little bit nervous about making it in the first place. I never thought that a place meant for community and empowerment would end up draining me so much. If this is your first time on the channel, this might be a very strange video to stumble upon. You're welcome here regardless, but this is not what my usual content is like. I guess I will start with my regular intro and we will just kind of see how it unfolds from there. Hello, my witchy friends. Welcome to the channel, or welcome back if you are a returning subscriber. My name is Sophie. I'm the Midwest Magician, and today I want to talk about how I was in a toxic coven and kind of share for you my story. But I do have some disclaimers that I would like to get out of the way. I left this group back in March this year, 2025. And to be completely honest with you, it really has taken up until this point to kind of process everything that happened and my feelings about that. And I don't know that I'm totally done processing it, but I feel like I can actually talk about it now. This was kind of a more public coven, and I know a lot of my subscribers were wondering what happened. I did make a post about my departure and kind of distancing myself from that group, but I didn't really go into anything because, again, I was still processing everything. It felt like a really bad breakup with more than one person. And I was scared to talk about this for so long because, one, I was embarrassed. I felt very bullied within that group, which is not something fun to talk about. It's not something that I want to publicly put on display of I was bullied. That's embarrassing to me. And it kind of brought me back to being in middle school and high school and just kind of that level of pettiness, bullying, and manipulation going on. The other reason that I was nervous to talk about this is because the person that caused me to ultimately want to leave and sever ties with the entire group, they have a significantly larger platform. It is scary to talk about, but I've come to the conclusion that I shouldn't let my apprehension of how a bully may or may not react to what I have to say about their actions scare me from saying it. They don't have that power over me. They cannot dictate what I say on my platform. Fuck that. I do also want to note that things happened with this group after I left that ultimately caused the entire coven to collapse in on itself. I've heard what happened, but I wasn't there, so that's not something that I can speak on. I do also want to make it abundantly clear, I will not be naming any names in this video. That is for my own protection, for the protection of the people that were a part of this group, and ultimately because that's not the important part of the story. It's also not like it was a huge secret who was in this group. Like I said, it was very public. But if you do know the people that were in the group, I would very much appreciate it if you keep their names out of my comments section. Do not go to their page to harass anybody. This is me sharing my story, and they don't really have to have anything to do with it. My next disclaimer is that I am not in any way, shape, or form accusing all covens of being toxic. I think it's important to note that covens all have different structures, they have different practices. Some of them are eclectic, some of them follow specific traditions. Ultimately, coven culture varies widely. In fact, I personally think that this coven that I was a part of was really good at the beginning and had a lot of potential. But unfortunately, in my experience, one bad apple did spoil the bunch. The coven that I was a part of was non-hierarchical and eclectic. And what that means is that no one person was in charge of the group, and basically all of our different backgrounds were welcome. The decision-making process was more so on a majority vote, although a lot of the times things were very unanimous, and all styles of practices were welcome. We had brand new witches, we had very seasoned practitioners, we had folks that were kind of in transition with their path, changing from one way of practice to another. There were folk practitioners, druids, and chaos witches. Needless to say, we were absolutely very eclectic. And that was something that I felt made us a lot stronger as a group. The last disclaimer before we get into this is that I am sharing my personal story. The intention behind this video is to help others identify red flags that either I potentially missed or overlooked, and hopefully protect themselves from toxic groups. In this video, I want to talk about why I wanted to join a coven. I want to talk about the way it was structured. I want to talk about the good things, the red flags that started emerging, when those red flags became really undeniable, and how I left. And after I share my personal story, I'd like to take some time to talk about different warning signs, how to identify if you're in a toxic group, and give some guidance on how to safely depart, as well as kind of how to move on after that and find your footing again. This is going to be a long one, y'all. So I would like to invite you to grab a drink, grab a snack, get yourself cozy. With all that being said, let's go ahead and talk about it. I want to start by talking about why I wanted to join a coven and why I joined this coven. When I was approached for the possibility of joining this coven, I was absolutely thrilled. This was a fairly new coven that had just started a few months prior, and the first people that were a part of this coven, that founded this coven, were also a part of another coven that ended up going up in flames. Red flag number one. But like the phoenix, this coven seemed to rise from the ashes to start anew. At this time in my life, I was just kind of starting to do things for myself. For a really long time in my life, I had put my wants on the back burner in order to make sure that all of the needs in my life were fulfilled. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. It's hard to put things that you want to aside, but I had finally gotten to a point in my life where everything really felt taken care of and secure. So I was ready to do something for me. I was really excited to have something in my life that was dedicated to my practice and growth. And I thought it would be really good to have kind of a dedicated time and space, allowing me to really step outside of my routine and really do something purely for myself. My main goals for joining were to have a spiritual community and sharing a practice with others. Even if we all had our individual practices outside, having something together was a really alluring idea. I was also really excited about a sense of belonging. Being in the witchy sphere can be kind of isolating, especially as a solo practitioner. It's not like we have a place to go to church like the Christians do. It's not like we have a regular meetup time as witches. Most of us have very different practices from one another. So the idea of community was very exciting to me. This coven seemed really perfect for those goals, as it was set up to be non-hierarchical, it was eclectic, and it was supposed to be very collaborative and seemed like a very supportive group of people. Once I had joined, one of the founding members actually was so kind to reach out specifically and make a point in front of everybody to tell me that even though I was new and I was an initiate of the coven, that my opinion and my voice mattered just as much as the founding members. And I thought that was very special, and I did want to point that out, that that was very much a green flag of this coven. I do think it's also very important to mention that I was being recruited by somebody that I really admired and respected within this community, which unfortunately hindsight is 2020, and now I can see that this created an unbalanced power dynamic right from the start. More on that later, but I think for now it's important to focus on the fact that I was really excited to connect more with this person and be a part of this micro community that they were helping to build. Let's talk about how the coven was structured and kind of the way that it worked next. Again, this was a non-hierarchical coven. Everyone had an equal say, and all of the decisions were made collectively. It was eclectic, meaning that we had no single tradition that we were all following. All of the members kind of brought their own magical paths and practices, which again, I thought was really cool and made our group a lot stronger. Now, each person had the opportunity to be leader of the month. It was on a rotating schedule, and the leader of the month was in charge of choosing our topic or main focus for the month, as well as planning out the weekly meetings. Everyone was individually in charge of diving deeper into that topic. So basically we would take that monthly topic, apply it to our own practices, and then come together at the end to talk about our experiences. We would meet once a week, and each meeting had a different purpose. One was kind of like a chatty sleepover meant to get to know each other better. One would be a spell or ritual that we could all participate in. One meeting would be entirely up to the leader of the month. And the final meeting would be kind of presenting our experiences with the topic of the month to each other. We also had a Coven Discord where it was expected that we at least check in once a day with each other. However, it did pop off quite often. We were quite a chatty group, so that requirement was pretty easy to fulfill. And then my favorite part of the Coven was that we had biannual retreats, and I did get to go to one of them, and it was quite a lovely time. This Coven structure felt very modern, inclusive, and very spiritually flexible, and it offered a lot of room for personal autonomy. On paper, the system seemed very healthy and very balanced, and it did work out for a while. Let's talk about the good things. It started off as a very welcoming atmosphere. I found that all of the members were very knowledgeable in what they were talking about, their practices, what they were doing, and it did feel very collaborative, where you could ask somebody about their experience with something or what advice they would have for certain topics, and everyone was very willing to help each other out. It was very much about shared learning, and I thought the monthly topics for the most part were very interesting and engaging. I really did like a lot of our group rituals and practices because it really did feel like a collaboration. It felt like we all had an important role to play and we were working towards a bigger goal together. And I do feel like I had a lot of personal growth with my practice towards the beginning of everything. It felt right to me, and it very much affirmed my feelings of wanting to join in the first place. Now, there were some red flags. Like I said, this is about a toxic coven. There were very clear cliques forming within the coven. We did have a rule that there were supposed to be no side chats, but that was a very clearly broken rule by one specific person. And to be fair, I was a part of a side chat, but it was mostly about content creation, as well as chatting about a YouTuber that wasn't even in the witchy sphere, just someone that we were all kind of watching their videos and connecting on. And I am willing to be corrected, but as far as I can remember, I don't really remember talking about other Coven members within that side chat. It was mostly about, again, content creation and connecting on watching the same YouTuber. There was also a very valid worry from another Coven member that this Coven specifically may be turning into a fan club for one of the members, which that criticism and concern was met with a lot of hostility and anger from that individual. But if I'm being honest with you, I could see it happening in real time. To be even more transparent, in the original group, there was already an admirer of this person. I was the second one to join, and everyone that came in after me, aside from one person who happened to be in the last group but joined this one way later, was also a fan. And again, I feel like that creates a very unbalanced power dynamic. It really seemed like this person was kind of trying to bring in all of their fans and admirers as a way to seem more legitimate or more valid. I don't really know exactly the motivation behind it, but everyone that joined after me, except for one person, was a fan, including me. There was also an increasing pressure to participate at a moment's notice. Again, we just had the expectation that everyone was to check in once a day just to make sure everything was fine and to have a good participation within the group. But this was taking it to a whole nother level. If anything was being discussed, we needed to drop everything and acknowledge it and make a snap decision on it. There was really no time allotted to think, and if you didn't answer within that individual's preferred time frame, which was right now, you would be getting a separate text, you would be getting tagged constantly in the Discord. So needless to say, this was a lot different than check in once a day. And may the gods have mercy on your soul if you were to question anything, if you were to have differing thoughts or opinions or concerns about things within the group. So much for eclecticism and collaboration, right? There was also the start of a very weird dynamic where most of the group was very active and supportive of each other. We would make announcements about things that we were working on, and everyone would be excited and go show their support, while only one person would emerge when they wanted to talk about themselves. I noticed that they would never participate in congratulating others for their accomplishments, but again, we were all expected to drop everything in order to celebrate this person, which everyone was still happy to do. But they would pop in, make an announcement, collect all of their praises, and disappear. It was very odd, and after leaving the group and discussing this with a few people, I was not the only one who noticed it. There was also a lot of drama beginning to start, and it was stemming from one individual. However, they would use other Coven members as a shield and almost as a way to test the waters on what they wanted for the group. So they would send people to go kind of do their bidding and then immediately be there to swoop in and agree and sing praises to this, which the way that they would talk in the Discord was very much scripted and honestly irritating. So to be clear, the idea was already theirs. They just had someone else present it so they could agree with it. Which, to be honest with you, was blatantly obvious and really called into question what they thought of everyone else's intelligence. We're not fucking stupid, and you're not as slick as you think. Overall, it was beginning to feel very manipulative, not only to the person presenting someone else's ideas, but to the group in and of itself. And at this point, it was still kind of few and far between where it was like, okay, this is weird and I know what's going on, but I'm gonna brush it off and not worry about it. There was also a lot of times where the group was made to be turned against specific people for one reason or another. And again, everything needed to be dealt with immediately per one person. And it was just getting really exhausting. I wanted to be understanding and see the whole picture. I wanted to show grace and give the benefit of the doubt, even though deep down I did know what was happening. I want to talk about when it became undeniably toxic. However, I am not going to get too deep into specifics because not all of the stories are mine to share. I witnessed it countless times in the group, and then eventually it was pointed at me. I don't think it was even necessarily about me. It was just kind of my turn to experience it like a bunch of others had before me. But it was getting to the point in the group where it felt like somebody was always in trouble, and it was either for things that were non-issues or things that nobody could have guessed would be an issue. An example of this is genuinely everyone in the Coven but one person got in trouble for not recruiting more members. We previously had decided on a maximum cap for the group, and there was no expectation to be constantly recruiting, so nobody really was. The idea was if a candidate were to come up, then we can bring them to the Coven and talk about it. We also had an expectation of no more than one interview for a new initiate per month. Again, should we have a candidate? I digress. We apparently weren't recruiting enough, and we were all accused of only one person doing all of the work while we just let them, when there was no expectation or requirement for anyone to be recruiting. Whoops, our bad, I guess. But when things started to get really bad, it was in rapid succession. There was almost never a time of peace anymore. There was more and more controlling behavior and a lot more emotional manipulation. There was also a very big expectation for basically us to only be friends with people in the Coven. There was a lot of jealousy, which was very odd. And if one person was not a fan of somebody, which to be completely honest, it seems like they weren't a fan of anybody, it became very isolating, and it made me kind of afraid to be associated with anyone outside of the Coven. There was a lot of gaslighting to the point of making you second guess your own memories. And I do think it's very, very, very important to note that the group chats in the Discord were constantly wiped clean. If a new member was added, poof, everything before they were added in a specific chat was gone. If there was a conflict that was previously resolved, poof, everything about that conflict is wiped clean. So really there would be no records of anything to ever reference back at, which would be fine if that conflict was not constantly resurfacing. And I do want to say that basically any and all conflict was tucked away and saved in this person's back pocket to be used against them down the road, even after a supposed resolution. There was also a lot of shaming being disguised as open communication, and eventually it got to the point of kind of punishing non-compliance, but again, by using other people's feelings about old situations as ammunition. Everyone was always a shield being used for this one person. This person really likes to manipulate others and use them as pawns, and it really just felt like they were playing a game with all of us. And I don't know about you, but I didn't sign up to play Monopoly when I joined a Coven. So here is the beginning of the end for me. It was my second turn to be leader of the month, and I was inspired by another creator on YouTube for the topic that I ultimately chose. It was going to be kind of my own take and spin on their ideas, and I had multiple ways kind of planned out for people to choose from to explore this idea. And of course, if they thought of their own idea, that's more than okay. I just wanted to provide ample examples for them to be able to select. As a matter of fact, I planned this for 2 weeks. And before I announced the topic, I wanted to make sure everyone was okay with what I had chosen, which I realized was a huge mistake. I should have just done what I wanted, but at the same time, this was the catalyst to me leaving a toxic environment, so I'm okay with it. Well, let's just say my idea was not taken well at all by one person, to the point where I really couldn't get a thought in, even with others in the group wanting to hear the idea out. But before I go further though, I do need to take accountability here. Someone else in the group previously had issues with the YouTuber that I took inspiration from. I knew about their issue with this creator, but I genuinely had not considered that using this topic would hurt my Coven mates' feelings. And that was a mistake, and that was entirely my oversight. And to this day, I am very sorry that I hurt their feelings. That was never my intention, and I should have considered them when thinking about this plan. I have reached out to them personally to apologize, but in the spirit of making this a very transparent video, I do want to say that I am human and also make fuck-ups. The difference is that I can acknowledge when I make mistakes, and I'm willing to own up and apologize. Anyways, in that moment that I was presenting my idea to the group, I was relentlessly bullied by this person. I respected their boundaries by immediately offering to drop that entire topic. I did ask if anyone had any alternative ideas, since I had spent 2 weeks planning for this and hadn't imagined that there would be an issue with it. It felt like me respecting their boundaries was not really acceptable to that individual. It felt like they wanted me to fight for my topic, even though I made it entirely clear that if something makes somebody uncomfortable, I'm not going to pursue that. And it really felt like the only way to move forward in this was to basically let them pick the topic, which was very frustrating for me because I did ask for time and space to be able to think of alternative ideas. However, they just came back at me with a list of ChatGPT generated things. So I gave in and just let everybody vote on that. And honestly, it left me feeling very worn down, very frustrated, and very sad. The tone that was used to talk to me, the way they would not let up, and the things that they said to me, as well as using other people in the group to go against my idea, made me cry. It made me feel like a horrible piece of shit person for even considering that. And I kind of suspect that that was their intention, if I'm being transparent with you. Anyways, in the spirit of being a good sport, I pivoted my plans and I let it go. Even though I did leave that interaction feeling very beaten down and very bullied. And I would like to mention that after this interaction, the chat was wiped clean. So fast forward a few weeks and someone was being used yet again to present ideas that weren't theirs in order for those ideas to be validated by the person who asked them to present the ideas. They wanted to create levels within the Coven, which for me raised a lot of questions because this is an eclectic group. And the biggest question for me was who ultimately was going to have the authority to grant others to said levels, right? To be honest, the idea to me felt icky and it felt like a power grab, and I was transparent with the group by saying, I don't like this idea, it feels icky. Expressing my concerns was a big mistake. Huge. It made me public enemy number one. Again, we were made to answer within minutes with a yes or no, which really there was only one acceptable answer for this person. One of our initiates expressed their questions and concerns with the idea, and they were flat out told that their opinion did not matter because they were an initiate, when previously I was told that everyone's opinions mattered equally. But cue the gaslighting and shaming. This conversation went on for hours. Okay, for hours. The goalposts were moved, everything changed. Every time there was a question, it was flipped on the person asking the question, and then we were shamed for not understanding where they were coming from while the questions were asked in order to understand. This went on for so long that we even had to discuss it in the meeting that I had planned for that evening. And I honestly wanted to postpone the meeting because it had gotten so out of hand. However, it was a fun meeting because everyone was really excited about the topic and did a lot of preparation in anticipation for that meeting. And yet again, once we all kind of came to a resolution, the chat was wiped entirely clean. But long story even longer, it ends up coming out that this person is no longer happy with the topics that we've all been choosing, and they really only seem happy with the topics that they've chosen. Although they did give me praise for the topic that I chose for March. And I correctly pointed out that I didn't choose that topic, they did, and I was bullied. They didn't like that. They didn't like that one bit. Without going too far into it, they disappeared for 2 days straight, and I really felt like I was ambushed by this person when they came back. They ended up using the coven mate that at the time I did not realize I had hurt as a way to punish me for saying that I felt bullied. And it's funny actually because in their tirade to me, they said that I owed them an apology for me feeling bullied. Sure. Okay. Make that make sense to me, please. Anyways, at this point, I was kind of over it. I saw them for who they are, mask off, and I was no longer interested at all in being associated with them in any way, shape, or form. So I kind of want to talk about how the group began contradicting its own values. Our non-hierarchical group was being set up to become a hierarchy with this idea of levels. There was a very unbalanced power dynamic with all fans of this person being added to the group. Again, in the pursuit of these levels for ultimately, I would imagine, that person being set up to approve or deny people of their ascension to different levels. The eclecticism of the group was being lost and restricted and beginning to feel very dogmatic. It started to feel like the only way that this group was going to move forward was under ceremonial magic structure, which is not really the group that any of us agreed to in the first place. And this did have an emotional impact. This was stressful. It caused a lot of confusion with how much gaslighting and guilting and shaming there was. And it was really draining, and it made me feel guilty. It made me feel kind of like every time I saw my phone light up and it was the Coven Discord, my stomach was in knots. Who was in trouble next? What were we all expected to immediately answer to? Why weren't our boundaries respected when we said, hey, I'm out for the day, or somebody's on vacation visiting their parents in another country? Why do we all have to answer to this one person on their timeline? It really felt like my personal autonomy was being forfeited by remaining in this group. So let's talk about my departure. At this point, I had seen enough, I had experienced enough. Like I said earlier, it really felt like everything was just a game for this person. It felt like every time they got bored, they decided to stir up drama. They decided to wipe the chat clean, and it felt like they were really pushing the boundaries to see how far they could take things, how much they could manipulate others to doing their bidding, and how they could spin different side chats that were going on to point the coven against individual people. And personally, why would I want to see my coven mates in a negative light? It just was too toxic to ignore anymore. I made a very swift and clean exit. I was protecting my mental health. And again, at this point, every message notification really did kind of fill me with dread and anxiety. Someone was always in trouble again and again and again. And again, it wasn't unique to me. It was just my turn this time. At that point, I reflected on why I joined the Coven. I joined the Coven for something to bring me joy and happiness, for something to give me personal and spiritual growth. I did it for me. So at that point I said, fuck it. This is causing me dread. It's no longer bringing me any kind of joy. I have to get out. So I did. And honestly, it had to be done quickly to avoid attempts at further manipulation, to avoid pulling me back in. And honestly, after I did cut ties, I blocked people. And even after blocking, there were still several attempts by that person to get me to break my own boundaries that I set in order for them to be in control of my perspective of the situation. So I basically went in and cleared my name from all of the Coven documents. I deleted everything that had to do with me, and I made an exit. I sent a departure message to the entire Coven and left the group. I blocked the people that I needed to block, and I have subsequently now, after processing everything, unblocked the people that are meant to be unblocked. There's one person that is going to remain the past for me. I didn't really personally receive any backlash, although I was told what some people said after I left. I was told there was a lot of scrambling by a specific person and how they tried to spin the situation for them to be the victim. Honestly, I was met with a lot of grace from a lot of the members of the group. Many people did reach out to me, including one person that again was blocked, but the vast majority of the messages that I received from my former Coven mates were very positive and very encouraging and very understanding, which I really appreciated because it felt like a big breakup. It really felt so sad and empty and weird and hollow afterwards. I felt a combination of grief, liberation, and kind of uncertainty about what to do next, but also clarity that I had the freedom to do whatever I wanted next. I did end up making a Patreon post kind of talking about a life update after leaving the group and how it felt really freeing, but also left quite a big hole. It really felt like I kind of had to rediscover my own practice because so many things had been tied up in the Coven, and not just magically, but like it had taken up so much of my actual life at that point. So now I think it's very important to talk about the warning signs of a toxic Coven. And again, not every Coven is going to be the same, but from my experience, these are some things to look out for. A lack of transparency regarding leadership. I think it's very important that decision-making processes are laid out clearly. If the Coven is non-hierarchical, there needs to be checks and balances to make sure that that remains. And if there's any pushback on questions regarding those things, that is a major red flag to look out for. I do also think it's very important to look out for either emotional or spiritual manipulation or a combination of both. Phrases like, if you were truly committed, you would, or again, the need for you to drop everything to answer a question that is not at all urgent. Another warning sign to look out for is gatekeeping or shaming personal practices. There was a lot of shaming about my practice directly to me, but thinly veiled as I don't mean you though, not your practice. Yours is beautiful, but this is what I hate about this. So if people are shaming the way you practice and thinly veiling it with a not you though, that's a warning sign. Another warning sign is a pressure to conform. Conform doesn't have to mean conforming to a specific practice. If there are boundaries that you have set as a hard no, and somebody is pushing you to break those boundaries or bend on them or anything that would make you feel uncomfortable, don't do it. Fuck that. And again, building off of that, boundary violations are a huge warning sign. That could be emotionally, spiritually, or physically. But if you set a boundary and somebody is trying to get you to put that boundary down for them, don't. You have to respect your boundaries or nobody ever will. And another big warning sign is having a culture of fear, of gossip, or favoritism. Now I want to talk about recognizing if you might be in a toxic coven already. If you are feeling drained rather than uplifted after gatherings, you might be in a toxic coven. If you feel afraid to disagree with something or express your own beliefs, then you might be in a toxic coven. If you find yourself justifying abusive behavior, you might be in a toxic coven. If you feel like you're losing personal autonomy, you might be in a toxic coven. If members are discouraging outside resources or communities, then you might be in a toxic coven. And I know it can be really hard to reflect on these things, especially because when you're in a toxic environment, it can be really easy to say, well, it's not that bad, it's only sometimes. But the best way for me to describe what it felt like to be in a toxic coven is by using the boiling frog analogy. And if you haven't heard of this, let me briefly describe it to you. If a frog is put directly into a pot of boiling water, it will jump out. It is a sudden change and a sudden shock, and it immediately knows that something is wrong. However, if a frog is placed in a pot of cool water and the stove is turned on and slowly but surely the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter, it's constantly getting used to the changing temperature, not perceiving the danger that it is in, and will remain in the pot until it dies. Next, I want to talk about how to move forward and depart safely. If you need clarity on the situation, if you're not sure if you should leave, if you're not sure if it's toxic, first, if you're asking yourself if it's toxic, it probably is. But I recommend journaling about what is feeling off. I'd recommend doing divination. And I would also recommend reaching out to somebody that is outside of the group. That way you have an objective person to talk to about the situation. And again, they're not the frog in the pot of boiling water, but you might be, and they can see those signs and help you to get some clarity. So please make sure if you're in a coven to still have friends outside of the group, because being in a toxic environment can be very blinding, and a lot of abusive behavior can be swept under the rug or just normalized. If you need help leaving the coven, a few strategies that I would recommend are setting your boundaries very clearly and very simply. Do not leave room for interpretation. Make the cut, set your boundaries, and get out. Avoid giving long emotional explanations. It's honestly not necessary. You can say what you need to say in a few paragraphs and leave it at that. Otherwise, if you leave too many emotional clues for people, they can exploit that and pull you right back in. And if you're in a in-person coven, it's okay to leave in writing. If in-person is too uncomfortable, if it feels yucky or unsafe, you need to trust your intuition and leave in writing. And again, when I left the coven, it felt very weird and hollow and empty. So I do want to provide some kind of aftercare tips if you're feeling a similar way to how I was. You have to reclaim your private practice. That might be really hard. It might feel so weird to proceed with your magical work after being in a toxic environment. And I fully understand that. But having some semblance of your practice back is going to be so important for rebuilding. So even if it's just adding cinnamon and speaking intentions into your coffee, that's a place to start. I would also recommend seeking out supportive and healthy communities, which I know can be scary after leaving a toxic situation, but it's very important to know and recognize that not every group is toxic. There are thriving, healthy communities out there, and it's important to not let ourselves be too traumatized or too afraid to trust other people. And I do also want to mention that it is totally normal to allow yourself to grieve what happened, as well as to grieve what you wished the coven would be. Definitely allow yourself the time and the space to feel your feelings, but I do want to recommend not getting too caught up in those feelings. Let them come and let them go. And I do want to leave you with some encouragement. Leaving a spiritual group does not make you less spiritual. Leaving a toxic environment might feel scary, but honestly, it's more scary to stay. You are allowed to prioritize your safety and your well-being, be that spiritual, emotional, or physical. If it feels yucky, if it feels toxic, if you're questioning anything, I think that you should explore those feelings and find out for yourself if you're in a toxic environment. I'm not really sure how to close out this video either. I feel like I've been talking for hours on end. I don't know how long this is going to be. I, again, don't know how this is going to be received. And I'm nervous about it. I'm very nervous about it. I want to thank you for staying here and listening to my story. I hope that providing some warning signs and giving some prompts as to if you might be in a toxic coven yourself or a toxic environment. This doesn't have to just be for covens, but I hope this can help at least one person out there. That's my intention with all of this. I was thinking about doing a portion of this video just for Patreon as an extended edition, but I'm considering publishing the whole video for everyone because I feel like there is a lot of context that is missed if I don't provide the whole story. I guess we'll see. I might cut this out. I'm not sure. I don't know how this is going to be edited. I just wanted to share my story and give some tips, some red flags, and some encouragement if you're in a situation similar to mine. I would like to invite you, if you have a similar experience with toxic environments, to share your story below. It helps a lot to know that people are not alone in this, especially if you're currently in a toxic situation. I think it's really helpful to see that not only are you not alone in experiencing a toxic environment, but that there are ways to get out and there are ways to feel better after. So if you have a story to share, please do share it in the comments down below. I do ask that you respect whoever's privacy that was involved in your toxic experience. If you made it to the end of the video, you're a rock star, because this was so long. It was such a long video. My throat is hurting, I'm feeling hoarse, but thank you so much for staying to the end. If you did stay to the end, could you leave a moon emoji? I love to see who watches all the way to the end, and I'm curious how many of you made it here. Thank you so much for being here with me. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.